almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. I mean, it feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water.
Today we walk into this house with an iconic South African plant, the Alu Ferox. We must take the bitter with the sweet.
It is a matter that is under consideration. And all I would say is that watch this space.
Welcome to this week's episode of the SA Money Report. This financial podcast is hosted by Deputy Editor Ahmed Arif.
While state capture hollowed out some of our state-owned companies like Eskom and Transnet, or some of our big institutions like the National Prosecuting Authority, we always kind of fell back on our Chapter 9 institutions, the Public Protector, the Auditor-General, to protect us and kind of support constitutional democracy. Now, while the Office of the Public Protector is facing its fair share of issues and allegations, especially centered around the suspended Busisiwe Mqobane, it's the Auditor-General that we've all put our faith in now. The Auditor-General who can highlight issues of misspending, irregular, fruitless or wasteful expenditure, an Auditor-General that holds state institutions to account, quite literally as their accounts. Right? Now, well-respected Auditor-General Tsakani Maluleke is facing a barrage of allegations. Helping us to untangle these allegations and how the Auditor-General was apparently vindicated is News 24's parliamentary and labour reporter Kolakane Magubane. Hi Kolakane, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Simon. How are you doing?
Good, man. Okay, Kolakane, the Auditor-General is one of the most respected public officers in South Africa. Can you give us like a quick Sparks Notes version of what the Auditor-General does and why this job is so important?
Yes, certainly. So the Auditor-General is a Chapter 9 institution, much like the now hallowed Office of the Public Protector, but where the Public Protector goes and investigates matters of governance in terms of allegations of perhaps wrongdoing or operations going awry. The Office of the Auditor-General conducts audits of government departments, of state-owned entities, basically any government institution that gets money from the fiscus, and conducts an audit to see if the financial statements that that institution presents are consistent with their actual spending, in order to find whether there is waste, whether there is spending that's occurring which doesn't achieve the desired results, and of course, if there is unauthorized spending, which is a very clear red flag that there are some shenanigans going on. A vital institution, as you have said, which is one of the institutions that not only holds government institutions, SOEs, and government departments accountable, but has also really been a bastion of good and sound spending and governance in its own right.
Kolakane, who is Mlungisi Mabaso, and how did he end up on everyone's radar over the past few weeks?
Yes, important question. Mlungisi Mabaso is the head of human resources at the Office of the Auditor-General, or what the Office of the Auditor-General itself would call the Chief People Officer. He is under the employ of the Auditor-General, but currently under a precautionary suspension over clashing with the current Auditor-General, Tsakani Maluleke. And of course, what had happened was that Tsakani Maluleke was holding Mabaso accountable for one of the functions that are under his responsibility, which is recruitment. And of course, Auditor-General, in order to conduct audits, has to recruit accountants or accounting graduates. And one of the requirements is that they need to have what is called a Certificate of Theory of Accounting, the CTA. And earlier this year, around July, they had a meeting because Tsakani Maluleke was concerned at the low amount of the recruits having the CTA certification and really wanted to drive home how unacceptable this was. Mabaso, of course, took umbrage with this, and this kicked off a series of meetings and encounters between Mabaso and Maluleke in which Mabaso had indicated that he knew things, quote unquote, that would be embarrassing to Maluleke, and during these engagements asked her for a separation agreement. And Maluleke immediately took this as a solicitation. She does not use the word blackmail, but people around her who've commentated on this have used the word blackmail, refused to engage on it, and told Mabaso to either continue working or to resign. And that's when Mabaso also wrote a letter to Parliament Standing Committee on the Auditor-General, and that kicked it up into high gear in terms of the intrigue going on in the office. He's been placed on precautionary suspension, and his disciplinary is supposed to continue this week.
So even though she doesn't call it blackmail, like you said, we've all kind of called it blackmail now. It's in the zeitgeist, right? So what were the allegations that he allegedly tried to blackmail the Auditor General with?
Well, it's a long laundry list of allegations that involve spending or payments or appointments that were inconsistent with the law, according to Mabaso. And it does get to the dirty business of making allegations that implicate the deceased, rather unfortunately. One of the allegations was that during her time as Deputy Auditor General, Maluleke had arranged payments to the then Auditor General, the late Kimi Makwetu, for things such as home payments when those were found to be security relocations, and a host of other payments, and of course the allegation that she arranged for her personal trainer to get a deal with the Office of the Auditor General, and the appointments of other officials in the Office of the Auditor General somehow being inconsistent, either because of qualifications or them not having applied for the job. And of course, it's very important to indicate that Bowman's has since done an independent report which has found that there was no wrongdoing on Maluleke's part. But of course, Mabaso, who News 24 Business contacted on Friday, maintains that he is right about what he says.
So you mentioned this Bowman's report, Kolekane, by Advocate Werner Krall. Right? What findings did this Bowman's report specifically make about Mabaso's allegations?
Yes, so for the lion's share of the allegations, Advocate Krall finds no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Maluleke. When it comes to the appointments, it is indicated that the appointments were made in consistence with with legislation and with engagements with the Standing Committee on the Auditor General. So even if someone did not apply for a position and ended up being offered the position, it was done in the name of smooth succession for the Office of the Auditor General to continue doing its work. Even if it was somebody who was within the office, that also lent itself to a succession. And of course, with that contract, personal trainer, that contract ultimately did not go to anyone who was known to Maluleke, and there was no reach around that was established there. What the investigation did find was control deficiencies, in order to say that there is a connection between the Office of the Auditor General and the Office of the Deputy Auditor General that allows things to be done without checks and balances in place. So say that the internal policy needs to be strengthened so that there will be checks and balances, which would mean that even if a check and balance was not there or the controls were weak, it does not point to an overt conspiracy by Maluleke to undermine the rule of law or legislation or the powers of the Auditor General, and that these just need to be strengthened to reaffirm and make it clear what can and can't be done. Certainly not an indication of any guilt in any way, because all of those allegations against Maluleke remained unsubstantiated.
Kulkade, on Friday, Maluleke appeared before Parliament's Standing Committee on the AG. What did she have to say about all of this?
So Maluleke did indicate to the Standing Committee on the Auditor General that she did feel like what Mabaso did and how he conducted himself did constitute intimidation and it constituted threats. But she was also rather concerned about what this means for the office itself, irrespective of whether she occupies it, saying that this office cannot allow itself to fold in the face of intimidation, in the face of threats, and cannot allow itself to be swept up by the political intrigue that perhaps other entities have been swept up by, because it is one of the few entities that has managed to avoid that, and it's doubly critical that it avoids being part of the palace intrigue of SOEs and government departments, because it is there to hold those institutions accountable.
Maluleke has been kind of praised for the way she handled all of this. What's the word out there about her? What are people saying?
Absolutely. Many are speaking quite glowingly of her. Hloyama of the EFF, who's in the committee, lauded her for her courage. Economist David Roth also said, this was a critical position because of the office that Maluleke occupies, which is much higher than the office of a Joe Soap, as he would say, perhaps even akin to a judge. So that office demands a higher standard of everyone who occupies it. Basically, bringing up the name of former public protector Thuli Madonsela, who is now hallowed as a champion of good governance and holding powerful office bearers to account. So in terms of the reputational battle and preserving the reputation of the Office of the Auditor-General, it was a huge win for Maluleke, her appearance before Parliament last week Friday.
Lastly, Kolakane, like you mentioned earlier, you've spoken to Mabaso, and there's still stuff ongoing there. So what's his take on everything here, and what's next for him?
Yes, quite right. Mabaso told us that he, along with much of the country, did watch Maluleke's briefing to the office, to the Standing Committee of the Auditor General last week Friday. He likened it to throwing everything except the kitchen sink at a real serious governance problem. He says he is confident in his assertion that the Auditor General must answer for a form of wrongdoing or the other, and he says he's got documents to this effect. What he will not address is the supposition of intimidation, threats, and even blackmail on his part, because that's, of course, the subject of his disciplinary proceedings that he is going through this week from Wednesday to Friday. But he has a lot to say, and moreover, it's that he is confident that he is in the right and that Maluleke has a lot to answer for.
Thank you, Kolakane.
Thank you very much, Ahmed.
This brings our show to an end. The music in this episode is courtesy of Getty Images and Epidemic Sound. This week's installment was produced with the help of News 24's genius multimedia editor Charlene Root. Thank you for listening.